So my topic is called Newspeak in 2017. Fake news is not the only problem. So I went to the AASL and American Library Association National Conference in June in Chicago. And I heard this librarian, Brandy Horn, who's a reference librarian from the University of South Carolina, speak on this topic. And it was inspiring because it was a different take on sort of this thing that's been in the news all over the place, you know, whether or not a source is credible and if it's fake news or real news. And I asked her after her talk if I could use parts of her presentation and bring it back to my state and present to my colleagues. And of course, because she's a librarian, she was like, here's my PowerPoint, go ahead, you can use it. So a lot of the presentation comes from what I heard. I've obviously added my own spin on it, but I think that hopefully it'll be a different take on this issue. So why did I call it Newspeak? We all know, right? 1984, the book 1984, and Newspeak was a fictional language, and I feel like George Orwell was a genius, you know, for creating this fictional language that removed rebellious thought, right? It meant there were no negative or subversive words in the language. Oh my gosh. And so what I did is, he had this quote in an essay that he wrote a long time ago called Politics in the English Language. And it says, but if thought corrupts language, language can also corrupt thought, which is huge. And so I've linked the actual essay if you want to go through and read it, but that quote comes from page 137. So basically, this term Newspeak has come to mean any new words invented for political purposes that are spread through propaganda. And in 2016, I don't know if you guys remember this, but the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year was post-truth, right? You remember that? Which was defined as, it was an adjective, and it was defined as, I wrote it down, relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. This is huge, and this is a big part of what I'm going to talk about today, because I think when we're dealing with trying to teach students about this, we need to understand both the psychological and the technological factors, and that's what I found inspiring in this talk. So information literacy, right, we have our graphics, we have our checklists, we have our acronyms like the CRAP test and the BRAIN. I had not heard of the BRAIN. Have you guys heard of the BRAIN? I think this maybe is more at the college level, but it's another acronym: bias, reliability, authority, intent, and new. So this is out there too. And in my school, because we're 7 through 12, I could use the word crap, but with 7th and 8th graders, it's a lot of giggles. So we use the word CARE. And that's the acronym that we've chosen to use. Basically, it's hitting the same points. So we have, as librarians and educators, you know, we value free speech. We want it. We know that it's an important right, even when it's ridiculous, but it's important, right? So in order to address fake news, we teach people tools and how to identify things for themselves, but the issue is that it's becoming this global problem. And Kathy and I were just talking about how it's getting harder and harder sometimes to figure out if a source is credible. So I feel like we need to reprogram ourselves and condition ourselves in how the way that we search for information, so that we're seeking, so that we're not seeking information for validation, which I'll talk about, but we're seeking it to gain a better understanding and for learning. So I want to talk a little bit about barriers first, and I'm going to touch on psychological factors first, and the whole presentation is uploaded, so I know I actually wrote on my paper, slow down, because I'm a really fast talker. So if I'm going too fast, signal me, but everything is uploaded too, because there are a lot of links in the slides that I want you to have access to. So two big factors that I want to talk about, and one is cognitive dissonance, and the other is the backfire effect. So these have been studied in the psychological research literature. And cognitive dissonance, the definition's up here, but it's basically when we have two conflicting ideas at the same time, right? And we're uncomfortable about that. So we go to human nature, we go to great lengths to avoid being uncomfortable. So that's dissonance. And here's a little meme about it. So this duck, this mallard says, despite ridicule from his friends, Canadian goose actually, Jeremy was not convinced that his mate was a headless, one-legged goose. So, you know, we have two ways that we deal with this kind of dissonance. One is what I think of as like the scientific method, where we address it. We have our set of beliefs, we're presented with evidence, so maybe we re-examine and we come to a different conclusion based on that evidence. So that's like addressing the uncomfortableness and reaching a new understanding. That's one way. The other way is we avoid it by ignoring it or disbelieving in it. We don't think it's true, even if it's like a scientific research study. So this is fascinating, and when I was hearing about this, I was thinking about my own family, because we've had so many debates about different topics, climate change being just one example. And I remember going into school and talking with one of the science teachers and saying, how do I get my family to understand this? There are like 1,000 articles that I can give them, and I'm not changing anybody's mind. And I heard this, and I thought, that's what it is. It's cognitive dissonance, and it's avoiding, because it's uncomfortable, and maybe I don't want to change my lifestyle or my habits in order to deal with this. So, again, we choose the easy path, right? So when we avoid something, we end up with this, selective exposure or confirmation bias. And again, I think we, as educators, we're aware of this and we kind of intuitively know it, but this means that we're only consuming information from specific sources, that we're avoiding some sources, and we're only remembering things that support our position and ignoring things that disagree with our position. So, I want to talk a little bit about the history of this, but first, do you guys remember this? Is it blue or black, or is it white or gold? And it like exploded. This is a great example of cognitive dissonance, and also internet arguments don't work because you will find a foundation of believers on either side, no matter what you think. Okay. So in education, I have this little diagram, and it actually I could flip thesis and frustration depending upon how you look at building blocks. But one of the things that I see as a librarian is, students come up with a thesis, and then they look for research to support it. That's not the inquiry process, right? And college students do this too. I've talked to a number of academic librarians who say that. They get a thesis because it's something they already know. Let's just go find some evidence to prove my thesis. That's not a new understanding. That's just finding things to validate what you already believe in. So, they look for research, and why should they pick a research question for which they already know the answer to? Maybe it's time. Maybe they lack the motivation. It's not an engaging topic. It's a forced assignment. Or maybe they just don't have a mindset of curiosity. I don't know. But we know this is really what we want it to look like, right? We want the research process to be, you take a topic, you look for information about that topic and determine how things are related, so you're beginning to get an overview of things, and then you start to form questions, and all of those questions focus into one bigger research question, and then your purpose is to discover new information and to gain a better understanding. So this is the goal, and I feel like our national standards, like the Next Gen Science Standards and the Common Core Standards and the new library standards, all have a foundation in inquiry. So I think we're all on the same page, but I don't think our assignments and some of the things that we ask students to do necessarily come from this perspective. So the Backfire Effect is the other one. Cognitive dissonance was one. Backfire Effect is the second one. And there's a great study in my reference list on the end slides about this, but this means that when a person's beliefs are challenged and then they're given corrected information, they actually dig in deeper and defend their position. And this has been studied. The study that I read was from 2009 by Nyan and Reifler, and the researchers presented subjects with an article, a mock article. And there were different ones. There were like 4 different scenarios, but one of them was about the Iraq War and the United States' involvement in the Iraq War. So they made up this mock article and gave it to people and had them rate whether they agreed with it or not. And then after reading it, they took it away and they presented them with a different article and said, oh, there were mistakes in that one. Here's the corrected one. And they gave them a corrected version of the article. And that article may have contradicted their bias. So then they measured that, and what they found was this backfire effect. They dug in deeper, and more strongly believed in their bias. So and this was quantitatively scored. You know, they did formulas, and they actually proved through a scientific study that people dug in deeper. And I feel like this was a light bulb moment for me, because as we're circulating information about fake news and trying to teach about credibility of sources, some of the people that we need to reach might be reacting this way. So just keep that in mind in terms of mindset. And I have a little, you know, picture here of the new book of knowledge, because remember that back in the day, like in my house, this was the definitive source. There was one. So if there was an argument in the house, you went to the B encyclopedia and you looked it up, and that was right. It didn't matter what I thought or what my brother thought. Whatever was in the encyclopedia was the right answer. So there was one definitive source. My parents had a newspaper, and there were about 3 major news networks on TV. So there was this centrist approach, and we kind of, as a community, had a shared reality, right? Everybody kind of was coming from, and because there were not many news sources, they had to appeal to a wide audience. So they had to kind of have, I feel like, a little more neutrality than what we see today. So we have this fracturing of information, and I love this. The best thing about the internet is that anyone can publish. We just saw that in the talk by creators. But the worst thing about the internet is that anyone can publish. And so we have this dichotomy going on, and you can find support for anything that you want, right? There's no more ending arguments with an encyclopedia, and no incentive for an individual to step out of their mindset, because they can. There's this large volume of almost infinite information, and people are forced to make choices. So we don't have this shared reality anymore. And let's not forget, we were talking about this morning as well, that the internet isn't altruistic, right? It's driven by advertising and courting a specific demographic. Different sites court different demographics and target because they want their advertisers to get clicks, so they get revenue, and it's, you know, that's the fact, that it's targeted ads and targeting specific demographics. So there's this appeal to our values and our vanity, basically, to keep us on those sites. So you might, like, you know, I'll use a conservative site as an example, not good or bad, but you might see something like, the mainstream media doesn't want you to know this, but we're going to tell you the truth, right? Specific language, or patriotism, loyalty, values, those kinds of words to appeal to our vanity. So, you know, this is what I tell the kids: the internet is not altruistic. If the product is free, the product is you, because the ads are there for a reason. Am I going too fast? It's okay. All right, so I'm going to switch focus from psychological to technological factors. These overlap somewhat. The first one is the filter bubble. Then we're going to talk about search language, the echo chamber, and social media lastly. So the filter bubble has been around for a while now, and I love this little cartoon that I found, which says, "Fishing with smartphone." It's out of Brazil. So here's the worm over here. Nobody's paying attention to that. And here's the smartphone, and all the fish are keyed into the internet, to the smartphone, and they don't even realize that the net is behind them. And they're going to get scooped up and be captured. So, again, when we're not paying attention to the content, we're getting caught. So the filter bubble, Eli Pariser, if you haven't seen his TED Talk yet, it's so worth watching. It's only 9 minutes, and he talks about algorithms. I use this with my students a lot, because I think that there's sometimes not an understanding of how their searching and their search history then impacts their results. So again, just a quick little summary. I don't want to be redundant, because I know a lot of you have probably seen it, but Eli took 2 people in the country, 2 different people in different places, and asked them to search the same thing. I think the term was Egypt, something about Egypt. Screen capture the results and send them back to him, just the first page. And they were completely different. And this was years ago, 2009, so the algorithms weren't even as powerful as they are now. But the point is that as we search and all of that is tracked, then that's the information that we continue to see back. And you know this if you've shopped for anything, right? And all of a sudden all the ads, whoop, they just change on the side of the page because maybe you're looking for a car or looking for a wedding dress, whatever, and all of a sudden all our ads are targeted because all the information is tracked. And it's not just the internet, it's also when we use like credit cards to pay for information. If there's a book by Charles Duhigg called The Power of Habit. That's another great read. And there's a little snippet in there about a high school student who went to Target because she thought she was pregnant, and she bought a pregnancy test kit, and then the flyers at home were for all baby products, diapers and toys, and the dad was furious, but the message in the book is that Target knew before the family. Based on the shopping habits. So like I don't tell that story to the students, but I tell them that your flyer is going to be different than your neighbor's flyer. Like, we're not getting the same information. We're getting our own realities, right? We're getting our own little bubbles of information based on our habits. It's huge. The other little thing that I found, data point that I found when I was researching this, is that 15% of the searches on Google are brand new every day. So they're tracking all of that information and then constantly revising their algorithms in order to address that and make sure that they're delivering on those searches. Okay, so search language. This is common in students. Again, in the library, all the computers in front of me, I get to watch. It's like my own little lab, and I see the kids type in questions, right? Even though they've had my search talk, and we talk about keywords, and you don't need to ask a whole sentence. But if you put in, is global warming a hoax, what the search engine will see is global warming and hoax. And it's going to look for those words and return those back to you. So some of it might be refuting it, some of it might be supporting it, but those are the words on the page, formulaically, right, that the search engine is looking for and returning back to you. And the same goes for this question, is global warming real? It's going to look for global warming, and it's going to look for real, because Google puts an and in between every word. So the language that a student or we choose to use is important and valuable, because that's what ends up coming back, which ties into the echo chamber. And when I was looking for an image of the echo chamber, I found this GIF, which is about a boomerang, but it cracked me up, so I had to put it in, because the echo chamber is this idea that, again, what you put out reflects back and comes back to you. And we use this with students, too, in saying that imagine your dream result, right? Like, what's on your page when you're searching for something? What words do you think are there? Those are the words we want you to try to use. But the problem is, as those things come back to you, what you put in, you feel like, hey, the world agrees with me. I'm right. Because it just validates your own language. So this is, like, for me, the pivotal thing in this talk. And it's the subtle shift that happens over time. So when we first join the internet and social networks, we are an active seeker, right? So here we are in the middle, and we are going out, and we are looking for people on Twitter to follow, and we're reading articles, and okay, I'm going to follow that blog. That sounds like a good blog to follow. And we are adding to our network. We're actively adding to our network of information. And then there's this transition that happens over time, pretty subtle, to where we become a passive consumer. So, and I'm definitely guilty of this, we become overwhelmed with the amount of information. This is as many people as I can follow. I don't need to add any more people because this is enough for me. And all of a sudden, all the information is getting delivered to me. I'm not going out and finding it, it's coming to me. And that process of moving from actively seeking to passively consuming, I think is really important. And because we stop being thoughtful. Because it's just coming. Now I'm just reading it. I didn't go out and find it. It's just coming to me, so I'm reading it. So I'm not necessarily being thoughtful about it. And it's prepackaged information with specific language. So, I have 2 kids in college. I had a conversation with them because they read The Skim. So if you guys know what that is, like the daily summary of headlines, And I was trying to explain that it's targeted for your demographic. Like, that's the point of this packaged information, Not that it's bad or good, but it is going to have specific language because it is trying to appeal to exactly your age demographic, right? And there's Salon and National Review. There are all kinds of these sites that sort of pre-package the information for a particular demographic. And I just feel like sometimes we get lazy a little bit about it and we lose that thoughtfulness and that critical thinking. So, you know, what happens is social media, we know, I forget the statistic, but increased numbers of people are getting their news online, obviously, and a lot of it from social media sites. Pew has great studies on this about how many people get their news from Facebook, how many people get their news from Twitter. And then people tend to share stories that validate their beliefs. Well stated. Good point. I do that all the time. Like this article. And then the people that follow me or follow you reshare that again. So we get this validation, this constant validation, like I got 7 likes for that. Huh, I must be doing something right. That's pretty good, you know, or whatever. So we get this, this is where the psychology overlaps, where we get this feel-good response, because that's human nature, from the group. So just be thinking about that our natural behaviors are reinforced kind of by the internet. So what happens then is we have less of a shared reality. We have this polarization that happens, two sides, you know, on opposite areas of the issue. And again, because it's targeted audiences, it's hard to get those people to agree. And if they don't agree, like the dress, since that's politically neutral, black and blue, or white and gold, we end up with this civil discourse breakdown, right? This breakdown of civil discourse and people living in completely different realities, which we definitely have seen in this climate online. So fake news is not new. It's been around for a long time. And there are a bunch of terms: yellow journalism, misinformation that's intentional. The accepted term seems to be disinformation, so it's intent to deceive. Whereas misinformation is more like you shared something that was fake, but you didn't know it was fake, you believed it, so you didn't mean to spread fake news, you thought it was true, that's misinformation. And then of course propaganda, which has a specific goal of appealing to emotion. And that's the old war poster is a great example of propaganda. What I want you to do though is think about that term, fake news, and stop using it. It's a great catch term, it gets people's attention, but it's not our term. Somebody's, you know, a group of people's specific term, and usually when it's an unfavorable something in the news. So let's try to use vocabulary that is what it is. Call it propaganda if it's propaganda. Call it misinformation if it's misinformation. Call it disinformation if it's a flat out lie. Because we have things like The Onion, right, and the Borowitz Report that have been around for a long time. That's fake news. But it's satire. We don't call that fake news, we call it satire, right? Its purpose is to entertain. So I would like, you know, to, if I can spread the message, to have people stop buying into that term and use the straightforward term and call it what it is. So how do we reprogram ourselves? We need to short circuit our instincts in order to continue to seek out new information, so we stay active consumers instead of passive ones. And we need to think about cognitive dissonance and selective bias because of that, and guide students in their information consumption. So I'm going to shift a little bit onto what we can do from here on out. So has anybody read this book? I brought it in case you wanted to see it, but it's fabulous. It's called Disrupting Thinking, Why How We Read Matters. And it would be a great all-faculty read, too. And when Adam was talking this morning about disrupting, you know, I thought that's what this means, basically. Disrupting thinking means that we are changing our understanding of the world and ourselves by what we read. So it's what we want to teach. It's what we want people to do. And there are these 3 kinds of readers that are talked about in the book, as well as lots of strategies. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. You can feel free to look through it afterwards. But a responsive reader, a responsible reader, and a compassionate reader. These are the 3 things that they target in the book. And I really like this in this context of trying to teach information literacy and inquiry and have people think about fake news, because responsiveness means that you are linking your experiences to what you're reading. So you're making an intellectual and an emotional connection. That's what responsiveness means. And responsibility means that as you're having those feelings that are awakened by what you're reading, you're questioning thoughts that it's bringing to mind. So you're thinking about the writer's evidence, what you understand, what you don't understand, and then what's the purpose of what you're reading, and is there bias? So you're being a responsible reader because you're consciously thinking about it. And then, again, the point is that it's pointless to collect information if you do nothing with it. Why bother, right? And then they ask 3 big questions of the students. And the first one is, what surprised me? What did the author think I already knew? And what changed, challenged, or confirmed my thinking? And what was fascinating, there's some great interviews with kids of all ages in the book. And if they asked little kids, elementary age kids, kindergarten, 1st grade, this was really natural. So, for example, a question might be, why do you think your teacher's teaching you how to read? And a kindergartner might say, because everybody reads. And tell me your favorite book. My favorite book is, I don't know, Click, Clack, Moo, because it's so funny, right? So it's this connection immediately to the text. They're having a response, and they can identify it right away. As we teach kids about decoding and answering questions answer these 10 questions about chapter 2, by the time they're in upper grades, maybe junior high, high school, why do you think your teacher is focusing on reading? I don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Why do you think well, maybe because I need a higher lexile and to pass a test. Quote, direct quote from a student in the book. No connection to it was funny, or it made me cry, whatever. There's this whole disconnect that happens. And basically, again, going back to Adam's talk about creators instead of consumers, the answer really is kids need to be asking their own questions. We know this. This is what inquiry is. We don't want to be giving them the questions. That's boring. And one of the students who was going to college, was it I think a senior in high school, told a little vignette to the interviewer, the researcher, and he said there's home reading and there's school reading. And he said, at home, I read things about computers. Well, why do you read things about computers? Well, because I'm trying to learn. He was driving his knowledge need and asking questions. And at school, I just have to. I have to read this and I have to answer these questions. So he was not engaged at all in that process because he was not in the driver's seat of it. So I don't know, it had some great ideas in here and I really like it. So I would recommend it. So there was this article online in School Library Journal that was called the 13, I printed it in case, 13 Tips for Teaching News and Information Literacy. So I just put them down because it's a nice little list, and I have some more besides this. But the first one I've talked about, give students the vocabulary, right? The right words to talk about this topic. Second one is huge, and I don't think we do this enough, which is always save room for discussion. Kids need time to process. They need time to think about what they've just heard and to respond. And I told you I'm a fast talker. This is something I work on all the time because I'm not great at wait time in a classroom. So letting them sit with that so they can have time to discuss. We talked about number 3, teach them to be creators because it increases engagement, requires better thinking. And then show new information students haven't seen before. We have so much at our fingertips that they don't, things they see every day, that's gonna just roll right off. That's not gonna make an impression. But maybe if you show a Charlie Chaplin clip, it might, because it's something that's brand new, out of their world, and they haven't seen it before. So think about new information. Tools and tricks when you teach, and again, this is where your little checklists might come in, or you might use the site, might teach them about PolitiFact or factcheck.org. One of the things that I started doing years ago now, but I try to spread it to the students is when I'm watching like a presidential debate, for example. I'm total geek and I have my laptop and my iPad and my phone, and I have 3 different fact check sites going at the same time because I have no idea if that tax plan is accurate. I have no idea if what you're saying is true, that you're going to create more jobs and that's accurate. I have no idea unless I'm looking to see, and everything is hyperlinked, and you can also get the transcript afterwards. You don't have to do it at the same time, like me, but it's just fun. I like to do it, and it helps me be a better consumer because I'm watching and looking for evidence so that I can make a better decision. So that's an example of tips, tools and tricks. And then collaborating with your staff, right? Deeper projects if it's across the curriculum. Again, I think we do this and we know this, but the students benefit. Teach better search techniques. This is really hard, because we are all habit-based creatures. And so, I asked the kids, how many of you ever used a search engine besides Google? Almost no one. How many of you have ever gone beyond the first page of results? Almost no one. But if all of those search engines are tracking our behavior and returning results, doesn't it make sense to pick another one and do the same search and see what happens? I guarantee you're gonna get different results. Maybe some, like 3 or 4 of the articles might be the same. But you can make a game out of it too, to get kids to try other places and see what kind of information comes back. Go with the weather. When in doubt, go with the weather. So, for example, it's politically neutral, and you can use how the weather is covered in different news channels and compare perspectives and styles as an example of how information gets delivered in different ways about the same topic. I know media literacy classes do this too. They do the lead-off story, and they record from different news channels and have the kids watch what was the lead-off story, because it's never the same on different channels. So why is that? Take advantage of teachable moments, like when those ads change as they're searching, pointing that out to them right at that moment. And then don't forget about print, right? So like print media, what's in the magazines, what's on your cereal box, having kids brainstorm about that and bring in those examples. Great low-tech option. Picture books. We have picture books in the high school library for this reason, because they really help kids think about how to tell a story and how to get information across based on the choice of picture, the amount of words, the kind of font, use of color. Make your topics relevant. So I think one of the best things we started doing in our school is when kids create, we have them put a Creative Commons license on their own work. And it's the 7th graders are adorable because, like, do you want to share? Oh, I don't want anybody using this. Mine! Right. So we can make connections that way by having them go through that process. Way better than teaching a lecture, giving a lecture on copyright. That's boring. But having kids actually think about whether or not they want to share it, whether or not somebody could use it for commercial purposes. Can they take your picture and put it on their blog? Are you okay with that? They really have to think about it. It's much more valuable. And then internet safety, I really liked this tip because I hadn't thought about this before. Maybe some of you guys do this, but identify what's called an internet backup person. Because the reality is we teach about digital citizenship and, how to conduct yourself online, we are still going to have 11 and 12-year-olds creating accounts when they're supposed to be 13, and they're not going to tell their parents. We know this happens. So this is teaching, having them make a connection between what's happening in their online world and having a trusted adult that they could go to if something makes them uncomfortable, or it's their safety person. Right? If they see an image or they read something or they get approached and something is uncomfortable for them, who's their person? Who can they talk to? Who's their safe person that they can talk to? It might be a teacher, it might be a relative, it might be their parents, it might be a sibling, but it's kind of a neat idea. So this is the link to that article, if you want to read it yourself. So then my other favorite strategies, you guys know the Stanford study, yes? That came out in 2016. Some people yes, some people no. So Stanford did this big research study where they asked middle school through freshmen in college, I believe, to look at news stories and images and rate whether or not they were real or not. And they did terribly. So that's one of the reasons that fake news hit the web, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, we're not teaching our kids, and they can't even do this. They should give it to adults because they probably wouldn't do so hot either. But one of the things that happened as a result of that is they began to ask professional journalists and the fact checkers, so what do you do? How do you do this? This is the biggest one, and the one that I always try to get my kids to pay attention to, which is called reading laterally. So the professionals, when they get an article, before they even look at the content and make a decision about the content, they open up another tab, that's the lateral part, and they search the author or the organization right off. They go right to whether or not, who's putting up this information, I need to know where it's coming from. That's the first thing they do before they even read any of the sentences, which is fascinating to me because I don't think we do it in that order. So reading laterally is a great strategy. Triangulation, we're good at this. You've got to have 5 sources, right? So we need you to be verifying that what you're reading is you're seeing it in other places. Personal example about this, maybe a couple weeks ago, something was on Facebook about a Democrat coming forward and putting forth impeachment accusation, right? Did you guys see this? And CNN covered it, and maybe ABC News. And my daughter was like, "Mom, Trump might get impeached." And I was like, "What?" So I go to the New York Times. There's nothing. It is not covered. There's not a story. Nothing. So I was like, okay, so triangulation, right? Where is this coming from? So we go to the CNN site. We look it up, and I said, okay, so this has been happening since July. Like, it just keeps happening. People keep bringing forward charges, they don't go anywhere, and then they bring forward new ones, they don't go anywhere, and there are other people in the Democratic Party who are actually trying to get these other people to stop doing it because it's sort of watering down everything. So so that's the triangulation piece. You see this, it's on Facebook. She thought, CNN, okay, I've heard of that source. Where else is it? That would be everywhere. I said, that would be everywhere. If that were true, that would be everywhere. So that's triangulation. The other one that's really important is getting to the source. So for example, she saw this on Facebook. It was a CNN article. Go to CNN, read it for yourself. Because maybe CNN got it from this place, right? This is what happens now. The news is so fast, and really there's incentive to be the first one to break the story. It's not always right. But in our little checklists, when we think about teaching kids our acronyms, and we think about, who's the author and who, they might be on a blog that links to a story, and the story might be credible. So go to the story. And if that story isn't the original creator of the information, go to that story. Keep going upstream and get to the original creator of the information, and then decide based on the authoritativeness of that source. Read outside the bubble. This takes effort. So this is the active part again, right? So alternative perspectives. Force yourself to look at other points of view. This is how we learn. It's critical. And we're bad at it because we want to be validated all the time. Fact check. I'm guilty of this too. Slow down and read the content. If it's a long article now, I think this is a product of online reading, but I find myself struggling to make it to the bottom. I'm like, done. I'm done. My attention is gone. I got that. I skimmed it. I got it. I'm on to the next thing. Slow down. Read the content. Okay, think before sharing. This is huge. And this one goes with the emotional. We've seen this, I think, around fake news too. If it incites emotion, if you have an anger response or a joy response, stop. Because it is designed to invoke emotion, so you need to think about why that is. That's a biased source on either side. It doesn't matter. So before you go ahead and like it or retweet it because, oh my God, this is the answer. If you're having that kind of emotional response, then you want to stop, and think about that first. Oh, I typed it wrong. And then this one, teach critical thinking skills and habit of mind versus specific sites. Kathy and I were talking about this. We have our northern tree octopus or whatever. We have our fake bogus sites that we use in this, but really, for high school students anyway, a few years ago when I started thinking about this evaluating information, I got rid of all the fake sites that I was using, and I put in all real ones. I put in a blog, I put in a Wikipedia article, I put in procon.org, I put in, because I want kids to go there and look at what I'm trying to tell them and try to figure it out. It's not easy. It's not an either or. It's not black and white. It's hard. I want it to be hard because I'm in the room and I can answer their questions, hopefully. I don't always have the answers, but I want them to practice on things that are useful. So I don't necessarily want a specific site. I want all different ones because I want them to take those tools and try to apply them on sites that they would actually use for research. That's the goal. Okay, so the first resource that I have listed here, it's hyperlinked, is actually an ebook by a guy named Michael Caulfield. It's called Web Literacy for Student Fact Checkers. He's a college professor, so this is great for high school age. Might be a little harder for younger kids, but you could take it and modify it. And he lives in Keene, New Hampshire, actually, and he teaches for the University of Washington, Vancouver. Used to teach for Keene State, I believe. And he designed this book because he was finding that even though there were all these checklists and the crack test and so forth, there was this gap still in what he was seeing in college students. So he basically covers some of the things I just talked about, 4 moves and a habit. 4 moves and a habit, and the 4 moves are check for previous work. So has somebody already fact checked it? That's what I was doing when I'm watching the debate, right? I'm looking and using the fact check stuff so I don't have to check it myself. Go upstream to the source, so that's getting to the original source, we talked about that. Reading laterally, finding out what others say about it, right? The truth is in the network. It will always come out. And then circle back. So if you hit a dead end and you can't find it, start over. You gotta start over and go back and try it again. Try a different search, try a different technique. And the habit is, when you feel strong emotion, and that emotion pushes you to share a fact, stop. Because we want to that emotional response is designed to short circuit our critical thinking. So we need to think. It doesn't mean you can't share it, just means stop and think about it first. The infographic, how to spot fake news, was on one of my very first slides. It's not a bad infographic. It's by the International Library Association. Factitious, have you guys heard of this? Yeah. It's a game. It's a game-based site. It's kind of hard. It depends on your background, but it's basically gives like a news headline, and you have to swipe. I don't know, like let's say right if you think it's true, and left if it's false. And so you have the news headline, and that's it. And there is a little like clue at the bottom that says source. So if you can't tell just by the language, you can click on source, and it will tell you where it came from. So you can see if that helps you determine whether or not it's fake or real. So it's kind of, I got some wrong. I was like, oh, got that wrong? And then Wall Street Journal has this blue feed, red feed, which are liberal and conservative Facebook posts side by side. Again, I think bias is hard to figure out without a lot of background. And so I know when I was working with juniors, this was something that I was surprised needed more background. So I'm glad to see so many things happen. Yeah.
Someone just turned me on to allsides.com.
Yeah, it's right here.
And so I was wondering, in your opinion, do you think that they're similar, the blue feed, red feed?
All Sides is left, center, right.
Yeah.
So it has the middle.
Right.
And All Sides has allows you as a reader to rank.
Okay.
So it's a little bit different. It's similar, but so the editors of All Sides identify their own bias.
Yeah.
And they start out ranking the articles.
Okay.
But let's say I read an article, so you can click on a topic like climate change and see left, center, right.
Yeah.
And let's say I read an article from the center and I disagree. I think that's liberal, that's not center. I can rate it left.
Okay.
So they keep aggregating that,
Okay.
which makes it, multi-reader perspective.
Yeah.
And then it's fairly new,
Yeah.
like 1 or 2 years old maybe? I don't know exactly when it started, but I only found out about it maybe a year ago. So
Do they then say, like, the editor said this, but yet our readers say this, or do they just?
yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Yep, and you can see, so you can click on each rating. Yeah.
Okay.
See, it's pretty. I mean, at least it's transparent.
Yeah.
Right. So you might not agree,
Right.
but it's transparent, and I love that. I love that we get people thinking about that because again, I feel like it's a really hard concept to teach. So yeah, that's linked here too. And Wall Street Journal, Blue Feed, Red Feed. I didn't know about it, just learned a couple months ago. The Digital Polarization Initiative was started by the same guy who wrote the ebook, Mike Caulfield, and he has this initiative, it's ongoing, where university students investigate a particular issue, a question, and then they publish their results on that site. So again, great for high school because you can look at what some are better than others in terms of quality of work, but anybody can join the project. So you could actually do it as a high school class if you wanted to, but you can see their processes, like what did they investigate and what were the questions they asked, and it's all transparent. Harvard's Project Implicit is it's like another bias test for social cognition. So when you go, you have to go on and agree, but you don't have to give any personal information or anything. And then there's a whole bunch of categories on the left side of the page, like race, gender, age, and I did the young old one. And basically what happens is you get words that are good and words that are bad, and images that are faces of young people, and then images that are faces of old people. And it's a sorting task. Speed matters. You have to go as fast as you can. And so your fingers are on like the E and the I, and this side is good and this side is bad, and so you see the word love, okay, good. And they tell you like an old person for this round of questions is bad. So old face, bad. Young face, good. Hate, bad. And fast. And by doing different rounds, I think it's like 7 rounds or something, at the end, you get a result about your bias. I have a strong bias for young people. That's what I found out. I don't know. So it's again, they're collecting the data, so that's why you have to agree, because they're using your test results too to keep collecting data on hidden biases. So here's the Stanford research study that I mentioned right here, and then there's a summary of it. That's, if you don't want to read the like really long thing, that's right here. That gives a nice overview of it. The News Literacy Project was started by Alan Miller, I think, a journalist, and they have a 10 questions handout that's pretty helpful. The first one is that emotional one, does it incite emotion? And then they are the ones who started Checkology, if you've heard of that. If you haven't, it's a good thing to explore. But, as I was reading this, Mike Caulfield had a take on this 10 question thing here, and it kind of goes along with our checklists, again, just trying to get kids to think about, like, it's not always going to be, if you get all yeses, it's a great site, what if you get 7 yeses and 2 nos, now what do you do? Because it depends what the nos are in, right? And what your information need is, and what, how much you need it to be really current. So there's so many variables. It really made me start thinking about, that's a great framework to start with, but I really want kids to move beyond just my little checklist and into a deeper thinking kind of scenario. And then this link just came out, this study just came out in October, The Future of Truth and Misinformation Online. It's a study by the Pew Research Center, and they basically asked a whole bunch of experts, journalists and so forth, about, let me read the question, I wrote it down. In the next 10 years, will trusted methods emerge to block false narratives and allow the most accurate information to prevail in the overall information ecosystem? Oh, I love that, information ecosystem. Or will the quality and veracity of information online deteriorate due to the spread of unreliable, sometimes even dangerous, socially destabilizing ideas? Guess what the results were? What do you think?
The latter.
I think it's going to be positive.
50-50.
Oh.
50-50. No, there was not a shining thing on either side. So, I think that, I don't know what that says. And then, this is interesting because when I went to the talk in June, the librarian said at the end, she said, I don't have any answers. Forget the adults. That's what I can tell you. Forget the adults. You're not going to change them. That's what the psychology research says. Focus on the babies. That was her word. Those were her words of wisdom. And then I have a bunch of references that I put together, so you can go ahead and read some of the articles where I got my information. And I do want to show, before we get to questions, I'm going to skip that. Have you seen this? Has anybody seen this?
Yeah.
The CNN Facts First. This was like a response. It's a 30-second ad. Okay, maybe I'll show it. because they kept getting accused of being bogus news, fake news. And so they made this little response about facts. I don't have the speakers plugged in.
This is an apple. Some people might try to tell you that it's a banana. They might scream banana, banana, banana over and over and over again. They might put banana in all caps. You might even start to believe that this is a banana. But it's not. This is an apple.
Okay, and then the last slide that I just wanted to show, see now I'm off my mirroring, is the graduate credit one. So that if you are interested in getting graduate credits for coming to the conference, you can do that through Plymouth State University. And Pam Harlan's actually in the room, so at the end of this, if you want to talk to her, you can. But basically, you have to do a little bit with artifacts and so forth and register, and you can get up to 3 credits for coming to the conference. So, okay, I would love to have, we have only about 10 minutes, but I would love to have a little discussion about what you're thinking and how you're dealing with fake news. Yes?
Well, I just wanted to add one to your resources, and that would be the museum.
Yes.
Which my understanding is, I just heard this morning that they will Skype for free with your classroom and give presentations and that type of thing. So that's a great resource as well.
Okay, I think I'll write down add.
How do you spell that?
Like museum, but news. So
.org.
NEWSEUM.
.org.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't know, but if you search,
Yeah. It's good.
yeah, it's an actual place,
You
yeah.
mentioned forget the adults,
Yeah.
go to the babies. So I'm K-5 library, and obviously this stuff is a bit beyond them, but we do go up to 8.
Yes.
And I'm wondering when you would, or when anybody else would recommend starting. Obviously, I'm in there, I'm saying, well, that could be photoshopped. We don't know if that's real, but I haven't started giving them real sources of how to figure out. What age would you say this is something that we should begin with?
I think the critical thinking part can be in elementary school. Like if you
That
look
is a big
in this book, for example, one of the techniques they talk about is called book head heart. So little kids, book is like what's in the story. Head is like what am I thinking about when I read it, and then heart is like what is my heart telling me about it. So like that kind of language with, it could be a little scholastic news article, it can be a fiction book, it doesn't matter. But the process of connecting and thinking consciously about what you're reading without, and again, the trick is to make sure that it's driven by the kids, not us, because then it's boring and it becomes tedious.
Head, heart, what?
Book, head, heart, BHH. So book is like what's in the text, what's in my head, and then what's in my heart. Really easy for them to remember. And one of the vignettes in here was a college student who was doing, had to do summaries of reading, and she was failing the class. And happened to ask one of, was like a friend of the family or whatever, so asked one of the researchers, and the researchers gave her that framework, and she said, when you're reading, I want you to put a question as you're reading next to anything that you're wondering about, or an exclamation point next to something that surprised you, and then a C next to something that either challenged you or confirmed what you already knew. And then when you were done, she said, so I want you to start writing about the first couple sentences about what you just read, like what it was about, and then what surprised you, what did you wish the author told you more about, and then what confirmed what you believed in already. Boom, summary done. Right? She just and she got then she called her and said the professor said that was the best 2-minute summary he had ever heard, because she needed a framework in how to think about it. So I guess for me, when I think about the little kids, that's what I'm thinking about, teaching them how to start that process without beating them down. Yeah. Anybody else? How are you guys dealing with this topic? What do you do?
It's a lot of responsibility. I feel like there's a lot of responsibility on us these days.
Yeah.
We can make it or break it.
I mean, I think it's good to say we don't. That's what we heard this morning too, like, we don't know, we don't have the answers always too, but we're modeling this process. This is what we do. And if you can't, like for me, I always say to kids, like, you get 5 million results, right? When you do maybe 37 million results, whatever, you need 3, you just need 3 good ones. You don't need 37 million results. So, like, try to find the highest quality ones.
You can spend 45 minutes telling high school students, please try to use GBRL, try to use EBSCO. You go right to Google, turn your back, and 75% of
And
them
why is
are
that? We were
Googling.
just talking about that. That's because their algorithms are so darn good that it doesn't matter what language they put in, they get a result. Whereas in a database, when they put in that language, they get something, and they have to figure it out. Like, that is not my topic, that's not what I'm looking for. So it's hard, it's so much harder. And we really need the search engines to, the databases to improve their algorithms.
Yeah, so one of my questions is, it seems the teachers will just say, go out and find your sources. And do you have Destiny at all? They
I
have
have
this new
Destiny.
collections.
Yes, yeah.
Should we, how do you feel about teachers curating what sites students will go to versus the approach, do your own research?
No, I think that's fine, because I don't think the goal always has to be, we do have time, right, the issue of time. So sometimes it may not be a goal of the assignment. That's the way I look at that. And I have LibGuides, so that's basically what I do with LibGuides. I put together resources to try to help kids focus. But it doesn't mean you don't teach the other stuff either. It just means that it doesn't have to be the goal of every assignment. Sometimes it's no time. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
It's not maybe on the topic, but I'm just wondering how net neutrality rules
Ah,
are changing all this stuff.
Yeah.
We're gonna be getting
Fascinating,
It's
huh?
gonna be an interesting.
Yeah, right to your representative. Yeah. That's a game changer,
It would
potentially.
be crazy.
Yeah. And the kids, they actually are pretty passionate about that, because guess what? They love Netflix.
Right.
And if the expense goes up, we're gonna make it an unequal world. This is, the libraries are the great equalizers. That's what I always say. That's like one of my mantras. And so we don't want the net to go in that direction, because we're gonna lose that equality
And it
of access.
even more polarized.
Scary.
Yeah.
No, I think that's important to watch, for sure. Yeah. Good point, yes.
Just one other thing to share. There's a great little video on TED called How to Choose News.
Okay,
And
yes,
it's
I've
a
seen
nice
that.
short little graphic.
I can put that up there too.
How to choose
How to choose news?
How to choose your news. Yeah. Oh, yes. And it gives that
That might
perspective,
be
like your
from,
World Book Encyclopedia image.
That's
about how-
connected to something else too, right? Like that comes from,
Well,
It's on you, I know it's on YouTube.
but who put it up? Because
It was in TEDx?
well, it was in a Times article.
I can't remember who, I saw
I
it
don't
somewhere.
know.
I
I
thought
have
that-
right here. Evaluating sources in a post-truth world, that was the
Yeah, gosh, I can't remember
connection.
the original site, but yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, great resource.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Good, okay.